Hey there, Larissa here from Beekeeping Made Simple, and this live post is about what to do when you have a weak hive. And I wanted to talk about this now because it is springtime, late springtime. So for some people, it's normal to have a weak beehive because maybe you just got bees and you just have to give them a chance. And for other people, it's a sign that you're just going to be struggling from here on out, really, until wintertime. So I'm going to talk about, for one, real fast, I just want to talk about what a weak beehive is because it's important to know the difference between a weak beehive and to know what to expect from your bees this time of year. And then I'll talk about what to do because first you have to diagnose the problem, what the weakness is, and then you can figure out what to do. And then ask questions along the way if you have them, and I'll get to them when I can. So first of all, a weak beehive is a beehive that is really not growing. For one, you can kind of tell, and if you've been around bees before, or if you have more than one hive, it's a lot easier to tell because you'll probably see one hive more active than the other hive, or you might like hear that the buzzing sound is a little bit different. You're going to see frames. A full frame is a frame that's covered in bees. That's roughly 500 bees per side. And when you look at a frame, you should have to lightly blow or nudge the bees away to look into the cells to see what's going on. If you don't have to do that, if you just see like 50 bees walking around a frame or so, I mean, that's a low population, and that's a sign of a weak beehive. Um, Deformed wings, that's a sign of an infestation of the deformed wing virus, which comes with varroa mites. If you don't see a lot of brood in the hive, if you're having to continue to feed them once you've already had your bees for over a month and there's lots of flowers blooming and there should be activity and they should be bringing in food. If they're not and they're not growing on their own, that's a sign of a weak hive. I'll put a link to our inspection sheet for beehives, and it helps to fill out the inspection sheet every week because you'll see, okay, this week they had 4 frames of honey. Next week they had 3 frames of honey, or they still have just 4 frames of honey and they're not bringing in any more honey. They still don't have any more pollen. They still have the same amount of brood. And so when you see week to week they're not growing and they're not getting better, that is a sign of a weak beehive. Early spring and the late summer and the fall, those are times when you should be, the hive's gonna be weak. Early spring, they're building. So you don't want to have too high expectations for them. They're going to be weak in the spring because they're just building. And then they're not weak in the fall and the late summer. They're just consolidating because they need to consolidate their resources. So they're going to get rid of the males and the queen's going to stop laying and they're going to really just like not use too many of the resources and hold on to that so they can get through winter. But if it is this time of year for you guys in the United States, it is May. It's mid-May, and they should be growing. And that's your expectation right now, is that your hives should be getting bigger. And they should be increasing in brood, and the queen should be laying, and you should be seeing baby bees in that egg, larva, and capped brood stage, and they should be increasing in food, and you should not have to be feeding them anymore this time of year. So, that being said, you're like, yeah, okay, my beehive sounds like it might be on the weak side. So first off, when you have a weak hive, the thing you want to do is figure out why it's weak. If you just got it within the last 4 weeks or less, give them a break, let them get situated. Especially if they were shipped, that's a big experience for bees. That's not a great thing for them to go through. Give them a chance to figure out where the flowers are, how to get food. Give that queen a chance to get out of her cage and to really walk around and start laying, because it does take 4 weeks for from when that queen lays the egg to when that bee hatches. Those worker bees. Drones don't take as long, but that doesn't really matter. It takes 4 weeks for those bees to hatch, and it takes a few weeks before the queen even really gets into that big egg laying mode. So that's a decent amount of time that your hive is going to get smaller because bees are dying. Tons of bees are dying every day because that's what happens. And the population isn't going to be going up for a little bit. So give them a good 4 to 6 weeks. once you're installing the bees and stuff. And if they overwintered, then you want to give them until you start to see, lots of flowers blooming. Maybe other hives are doing well, and your hive is still weak before you start to worry about them. Okay, so your hive is weak. They should be strong by now. And you have to figure out what the problem is. First off, a good one is to see if they have enough food. Um, you can feed them and see if they bounce back and they get better. You can give the sugar syrup, which is, right now here springtime, 1 to 1. By weight or volume, just, measure out 4 cups of water, 4 cups of sugar, white sugar, boil it, stir it together, add some honeybee healthy or whatever you want to buy to help them digest it. Put that in the hive, put a little bit of pollen in the hive, see if that helps. Leave that in there for a month or so, see if that helps. If they do start to increase in size and activity, then the problem is that they're probably just in a poor location. Almost everybody wants to put their beehives in their backyard, but that's not always a great place for them. It takes over 1 million flowers to make a pound of honey, so that's a lot of flowers. It's great that you have a garden and you have some cucumber plants, but that's not enough for the bees most of the time. So if that's not changing anything, or that food isn't the problem because you have another beehive next to it that is doing great and is obviously getting lots of food, the next thing that's really fast and easy to do is to just check to see if they have a pest problem. And the big ones you're going to see are the maybe small hive beetle and the wax moth. Now, those are easily going to be big white larvas. Well, the small hive beetle larvas are kind of small, but if you see slime in the hive or big white larvas crawling around in there, then they have a pest infestation of small hive beetle or the wax moth. Um, but most likely the infestation would be varroa mites. So if you see bees walking around with wings that are all tattered, that's a common virus that bees get when they have varroa mites in the hive. But you can easily do a mite test. If the population is really low, then you're going to want to do a test with powdered sugar because that does not kill the bees. Otherwise, I would recommend doing the alcohol wash because you have a more accurate mite count with that. And there are lots of places you can look up how to do that. It's pretty simple. A third cup of bees into a mason canning jar and cover it up and shake them around. And then you pour out the rubbing alcohol or the powdered sugar and you count the mites. If it is like 7, that's a mite infestation, and that's enough to really harm the hive. 5 is pretty bad as well. 3 isn't that bad. It's just you would want to treat at that point because you want to treat before the big honey season comes in the summertime. So you're kind of expecting the mite infestation to come later. But if it's like 7 or higher, that's really bad, and that can really cause a hive to be incredibly weak. You want to put mite treatment in. And really, at this point, if your hive is weak, just put in whatever treatment you want to put in, whatever one you can get fast and easily. Just be careful. Some treatments do not work well in high temperatures. So if it's already starting to get like 85 plus in your area, you want to stay away from, I think it's the Apogard and formic acid are a little heat sensitive. Okay, so that might not be the problem. To be honest, sometimes the bees just have bad genetics. Not all bees are super enthusiastic to bring in lots of honey. Some are lazy. You just sometimes get lazy beehives. Maybe that's not the nicest word to use. Poor genetics. But sometimes they just don't do well, and you're just constantly going to be trying one thing after the other. And this is where having another beehive, at least one other beehive, but maybe 2 or 3 other beehives helps, because you'll just see, okay, it's definitely not the location because this hive's doing well. It's definitely not some kind of environmental problem. They don't like the sound of the neighbors' lawnmowers. They don't like the smell of the mulch I laid down around them. That's not the problem because all the other bees are doing well. Problem might just be that your beehive has poor genetics. And really, there's not much you can do about that other than pinch the queen and put a new queen in. And then you can take advantage of the fact that you still have all these bees, you have all these resources and comb and everything in the hive. You can pinch the queen and let the bees make a new one. But ideally, you would buy a new queen from a queen breeder in your area. So she's local, she has the genetics to deal with your environment locally. If you let the bees make their own queen, uh, half the genetics are still there. And if the genetics are bad in your beehive, then that's, there's no point in making a queen from bad genetics. So, another problem that you could have with your beehive is just that they have a low population. And so they might just be taking a little bit longer to build up because maybe that queen just took a little bit more time to build up. Maybe they were just like, the person that made that nuke or that package that they gave you, there might have just been a lot of older bees. They could have been a little bit lazy putting it together. I mean, beekeepers are just humans and they're just trying to run a business. So they're just putting things together and selling them like everybody else. So if you just got a really terrible nuke, usually when you get two, you get a dud and one that's okay. So if your hive just has a low population because you got a crappy nuke, um, ideally, what you want to do is you give them a few weeks, feed them some sugar syrup because that will help to stimulate the queen so that she lays. And you can give them one frame of brood from your other hive. Now, you have to be really careful about this because you do not just want to throw a frame of brood in the hive because most likely that brood will die. Because when the brood hatches, they need to be taken care of by the adult bees. Like, if there aren't enough adult bees to feed them, you will see dead bees with their heads sticking out of the cells, like frozen. They look like they're frozen. Their proboscis is sticking out, and it's just like hard. And they've died, starving to death while hatching. I mean, is there not anything sadder than a baby dying, starving while she's hatching? It just breaks my heart whenever I've seen it. So maybe just because I had a baby last year. Um, Anyway, you don't want to give them more babies than what they have the resources to handle. So if in your other hive you have a frame that has you want the capped brood. You don't want the babies that are going to have to be in there for a while. You want the babies that are going to be hatching soon. So you want to give them capped brood and maybe like a frame that's just half capped. And the rest of it's like honey or just empty. Maybe some of them have already hatched, and just give them a little bit so that they can handle those extra bees. There's enough food for them, and there's enough bees to handle them hatching and stuff, to take care of them when they're first hatching. And you can share those resources, and that's one of the other reasons why you want to have at least two beehives at once, is that when one hive is weak, you can help share resources to help them bounce back. Because almost whatever the problem is, if it's royal mites, you can put in a treatment to help bring that population down. If it's bad genetics, you can get rid of the queen and requeen her. If they don't have enough food, you can give them sugar syrup, but you can also give them a frame of honey from the other beehive. If it's a low population, you can give them a frame of capped brood from the other beehive. And when the queen is poor and you want to requeen her, it's also helpful to give them a frame of capped brood because their population is going to be going down with no queen yet. So it's always good to be able to swap frames back and forth. Now, on that note, just be very careful. You have a queen bee in this hive. If you're going to be swapping frames from hive to hive, just make sure the queen isn't on that frame. You're going to take all the bees off of it as well because bees from one hive do not get along from bees from another hive. They have two different queens. They're used to two different pheromones. So it's not great to do that. You're just going to I made a video about this recently, but I take a feather and I brush the bees off with the feather, or you can just shake the frame really hard to get the bees off and put an empty frame of brood in the hive. You're not going to put a frame with bees on it in the hive. Now, if the hive is like really, really doing poor and your other hive is just super duper, 2 frames of brood, packed, tons of bees, you can give the weak hive not only a frame of capped brood, but like multiple frames of capped brood and bees. And now this will really bulk up your hive really fast. And you're going to want to do this if it's more so, say, like summertime, midsummer, and you're getting down to the wire here. This hive either needs to like really become a beehive or get out at this point. When you do this, you just add a layer of newspaper. So say you have a beehive, it's weak, it's just a few frames of brood and honey. You just take the lid off, you lay down some newspaper, open it up so it's just one solid sheet, lay down a few sheets so you're covering up the entire box. And you're going to put another brood box on top, and you're going to take some frames from the strong hive and your brood frames, and you're going to put them in all next to each other. Take 1 or 2 frames of honey, put them on either side of the brood. So the honey is like the bread in the sandwich, and the brood is all of the meat and cheese in the sandwich. Because you don't want brood just open air with nothing there. You want there to be honey on either side of the brood. The bees need to keep the brood at a very specific temperature. So you don't want it to just be in this open air box. And then you can put just empty frames on either side after that. And now then you really want to make sure there's no queen on these frames. Leave that queen in the hive, and you just want to check those frames. Watch my queen spotting videos. When you pull out each frame, you look for the queen immediately. Spend 5 seconds on each side studying, looking at that frame really fast, because that queen can just bounce from one side to the other. And especially if you're new at this, you might not be as quick at spotting the queen. So really just check those frames and make sure there's no queen on it. If you're still not sure, you can either look through the whole beehive, find the queen, put the frame that she's on, lean against the side of the beehive real fast, pull your other 2 frames out, put the queen back in. That's like the no-fail method to make sure that you don't put the queen in the weak hive. So you have a couple of frames of brood, 2 or 3, couple of frames of honey because they need some food, put the lid on, and then the bees will chew through the newspaper pretty quickly and they won't merge together. And this is just to keep the bees from the new hive from killing the queen in your current hive, because they don't know they're this queen, and so that's just their nature to want to get rid of this foreign queen. And also it can cause just some fighting among the bees. I found that if you take like a frame of brood from lots of hives, and just like have a whole bunch of different queen pheromones in one box, they don't seem to argue and they don't kill the queen. However, if you're just taking bees from one hive and putting them in the hive, I found that sometimes they will kill the queen, and they have you'll find some dead bees down inside on the bottom board inside the hive that seem that they've had some arguments inside there. So those are really some of the big problems you'll find with weak hives. If you just try everything and nothing seems to work, really it's just one of 2 things. It's probably your queen bee or the genetics, and you want to just replace her. And if still that's not working, and say you have more than one beehive and they're all just kind of blah and not bringing in enough honey to get them through the winter, much less bring you any honey to harvest from the summer, it's the location. And that's really a big overlooked problem for a lot of people, is that they put their bees where it's convenient for them, but it's not the best place for the bees. And honestly, I would not be too scared to put your bees somewhere that's not your home. And I am right now I'm here on the Big Island, where we have our queen breeding apiary, and it's pretty much beekeeping year round. So that's pretty nice here, though a little exhausting sometimes because we're not just getting started. It's just nonstop. And anyone else have any questions, let me know. But that's pretty much it. I had one person asking me how you can tell the difference between a strong hive and a weak hive. And, part of that, as somebody who didn't have bees yet, it's a more obvious question than I think when you already have bees. It's something that you can tell the difference a little bit faster, just the experience of being around one. But I really can't encourage you enough to have at least 2 or 3 beehives. In my opinion, like in my experience, having just a couple beehives, having 20, 30 beehives, going back down to just a few when I had kids, anything less than 5 beehives makes me incredibly nervous. And I've been doing this for over 10 years. I've worked for apiaries full time. I spent a lot of time with bees, and still having fewer than 5 beehives makes me incredibly nervous because beekeeping is partially just a numbers game. As a beekeeper, you can increase the odds of your bees surviving by helping out, but you can't predict everything and you can't control Mother Nature as much as humans try. So a 20% loss over the course of the year with your beehives is good. I mean, if 80% of your hives are surviving and 20% are being lost, that's a good thing. You have 5 beehives, that's you just lost 1 beehive and the other 4 made it. And that's great. And you can account for that loss by splitting hives so easily over the course of the summer. And it's not a problem. If you have 1 beehive, 20% loss, is maybe your beehive survives, but maybe it won't. And if you have 2 beehives, then maybe 1 or 2 of them will survive, maybe they won't. Um, and if you're a beginner, a 20% loss is almost unheard of. You're not going to have a rate like that just starting out. It's more so going to be more like 50% loss or 80% loss. So when you start out with just 1 or 2 beehives, the odds that they're going to survive are pretty slim, even for an experienced beekeeper, but especially for someone that is a beginner. Not just because you don't know what you're doing, but because you don't know what to expect and you don't know your seasons yet. You might kind of know when flowers are blooming and when summer starts and when fall starts, but you don't know all of the times for bees until you do it a few years and you look at your notes over the course of year to year to year, and it just gets so much easier because here I'm like, okay, I can't treat in February. I thought I could treat in February because I thought the honey season started in March. And then, of course, the year my son's born, February comes and my hives are packed with honey. And so now, after a few years, I see, okay, sometimes there's a huge silver oak bloom in February, and sometimes it's not so big. But the honey season starts in February. So now I treat every year in January. And that is needed. I thought I could treat at the end of the honey season, but it turns out I don't need to treat at the end of the honey season every year. I just need to treat at the start of next year's honey season. So I've made a lot of mistakes over the years. And when you have more hives, you don't lose everything. And you can always just build back by splitting the hives you have. And you start to see the seasons and how things change just a little bit every year, but you understand what's going to happen and you know what to expect. And it makes it a lot easier, and your losses go down to something more like 20%. And for most of you, that's going to be over the winter time. But that can also be in the late summer, early fall, when the bees are robbing each other like crazy. Here in Hawaii, we've unfortunately had a huge bee loss, not with my bees, but some of the larger apiaries, because we had an incredibly rainy summer 2 years ago. Like kind of like the summer into the fall, it just rained and rained and rained. It was just so insanely wet. It was ridiculous. And then it was dry. Of course, it was like when I was pregnant. So I was just like, I didn't even want to go out of the house. It was so dry and so hot. And so an intense amount of rain causes the small flowers on the Christmas berry to fall off. And then that dry spell caused a lot of the macnut farms to lose a lot of their trees. And the trees that did survive did not flower much. So some of the really big honey sources for the bees, nectar sources for the bees, were lost. And that caused a lot of bees to die for some of these apiaries. So, I mean, for the apiaries that feed their bees because they're doing queen breeding, that's not a problem. But for the people that are harvesting honey, you can't feed your bees. And so it was a huge population loss for us here in Hawaii. And you can't account for things like that, or for, the occasional hurricane to come through and to just wipe out all of the Christmas berry flowers in the late summer. But those things do happen, and you deal with them. And the best way to deal with them is just by having extra. Having extra bees. If you have just the amount that you need to sustain yourself in the perfect situation, you're going to lose all of your bees at some point. Every couple of years. So 5 hives I found is the best way to just handle that. And when one hive is weak, you can pull from all of your hives just a little bit, as opposed to taking so much from your strong hive. And it makes for a lot less anxiety, like so much less stress when you don't feel like you need to keep this hive alive no matter what. And of course, we don't want our bees to die, and we're not going to do anything to kill them. But we have to remember that we're just a beekeeper. We are not God. We are not trying to make bees perfect, because they aren't perfect, and Mother Nature is not perfect. And we're not trying to get rid of any problem to ever happen ever. Sometimes things just happen, and we need to just be ready for that. So instead of having to buy more bees next year and the year after, if you just account for that 20 to 50% hive loss and have 4 or 5 hives, your life will be so much easier. And I know that extra equipment is expensive, and that's why, I mean, I was never a huge fan of the flow hive, because um it just makes getting started beekeeping so super expensive. But even their hives are a lot cheaper. I built my own boxes starting out. I have a video about that. You don't even need a dado blade in a full size, um a table saw. I just did some miter joints, and those boxes are still really strong 7 years later. And they have actually lasted longer than the ones with the finger joints. And this is out in Hawaii, full time, all year round beekeeping. So it's just something that I recommend. It's something to consider, especially if you haven't started beekeeping yet. Someone says that they were just on the Big Island and saw a couple of swarms. One flew over our head at the Kamehameha War Heiau, and one was along the path on the way down to Mauna Kea Beach. Well, you know what? If you were just at the Big Island, so what? This is the middle of May. Then you were here in the semi-arid desert, up there in the Waikoloa area. And when you're up in that desert area in the springtime, you're going to have the it's just like this really white honey. There's these trees on our beaches that have thorns on them, and they flower from February to June-ish. And that's what you're seeing. That's why you're seeing the swarms. There's the Rare Hawaiian Honey Company and a few other beekeepers. The Rare Hawaiian Honey Company is the big one that brings their bees out to Waikoloa for that time of year. And so when the trees flower that time of year, the bees go crazy. The only thing is that I've had bees at a hotel up there, and it is really hard to keep bees up there year round. So they wanted bees all the time. And they do really well in the springtime, late winter to spring. And then it's just like, I mean, it's a desert. So they go to the palms. The honeybees do love the flowers on the palms. I don't know about all of the palms, but definitely the coconut palm trees. And yeah, the Rare Hawaiian Honey Company takes care of a couple of flow hives for the Mauna Kea Resort. I think some of the hotels like to say that they have their own bees, but it's 4 hives for a resort that has like thousands of rooms. But anyway, I guess bees have become a good marketing thing. Um, it could have been from the Mauna Kea's resort, but most likely it's probably from some of those honey companies. They have, like thousands of hives up in that area. And it makes a really delicious honey. It's not like a Hawaiian honey, but it's just kind of tastes like vanilla icing. And that's probably why you're seeing swarms up there this time of year. Oh, you're getting a couple gallons of Magnum honey from a Captain Cook beekeeper. That's probably the place I used to work for, Captain Cook honey. Uh, they do Magnum Christmas berry and the Lehua. And yeah, thanks for the comments, everybody. I see that there's somebody from Indiana and Washington State, and a person from Washington State's about to go play with their bees and make splits. Yeah, I can't really, it's really tempting to want to bring in as much honey as possible and to keep your bees strong. But if you can split your hives, and one, it's going to keep your bees from swarming. And I'm really an advocate of preventing your bees from swarming. Some beekeepers are more relaxed about it, but I really don't think it's fair to make your neighbors deal with a swarm coming into their house, unless you're far from other neighbors. But a lot of people have bees in somewhat residential areas, and I've gotten a lot of phone calls from people with swarm looking for swarm removals, and I don't think it's fair for people to have to be paying like $300 and looking for someone to get rid of bees because they just so happen to move into their house, and then they go back like every single summer. They're coming back because they smell it. So I really am a strong, I strongly encourage people to prevent bees from swarming. And a really easy way to do that is by making splits and just taking 2 or 3 frames of brood from each of your brood boxes, putting them in a split, keep the bees on them, just make sure there's no queen on there. And that those empty gaps in your brood boxes is what the bees need. Is what they have gaps in the empty brood boxes, then the bees are happy. They have somewhere to build new comb, like no foundation whatsoever, just so that they can build new comb. They won't cross it over other frames because there's frames on either side with comb already built out. And so when you give them gaps in their brood box, not straight in the middle, but usually like 2 or 3 empty frames in each brood box, then usually and I throw some empty supers on top. That's usually all you need to keep them from swarming. Sarah says that she split a hive and it swarmed anyway. Well, sometimes, I mean, it depends on how late you split them. If you split them while they're already like have some queen cells going on, then they probably will swarm anyway. You're not going to stop them from swarming if they've already started the swarm process. Some hives are just swarmy, or they just will swarm over and over again, whether they need to or not. But I really just haven't had any problems with just freeing up the brood boxes. And that's not putting in frames with foundation and drawn out comb just so the queen has somewhere to lay. I don't use foundation anyway, but that's putting a frame that's empty. So the bees have somewhere to build comb, and they have gaps within the hive. And you need to do that in both boxes, and then continue as they fill up these frames to continue to take the brood out. And that will just keep them from swarming because they don't have their brood isn't all packed. They still have somewhere to fill. And that almost always works for me to prevent bees from swarming. It's pretty rare that bees will still swarm anyway. And there are some beekeepers that don't prevent swarming. It's not a requirement. It's just a preference for me, like a consideration for my neighbors and the people whose properties I have bees on. But some people just don't, and they just let their bees do what they want to do. And I'm not going to judge you either way. So thanks everybody for watching. If you have more questions or comments, please leave them down below. Otherwise, I'm going to work on the video about using a bee brush and why I never bought one and what I use instead. And have a great weekend. Thanks for watching. Aloha.